Hey, this is Chris. I'm up here in Julian today. Wanted to do a little sort of historical walking tour of Julian video and point out some of the old buildings and stores and things that were associated with the people who we saw up in the Pioneer Cemetery in that video that I did. So let's take a look around historic downtown Julian today and look at some of the places of business of the people we saw up in the cemetery. So let's start our walking tour on the very west end of Main Street, just below the cemetery. This is the old stairway leading up into the cemetery, and before they had road access up there, this was the only way to get up there. And if you walk up just a few steps here, there's a nice historical plaque on the right that tells you about the history of the Julian Cemetery. And just below the cemetery is actually this old house, seen here many years ago. This is Drew Bailey's house. Drew Bailey was the town founder of Julian. Bailey family was very involved in different mining interests and such in the town back in the early days, 1870s through about the early 1900s. The Bailey house is still there. It's part of, right now, Julian Beer Company, but it's just right next to the steps that lead up to the cemetery and the Bailey family plot as well. But the Bailey house has been kept up nice in recent years because it's part of this sort of restaurant brewery type business down here. So the Baileys had, like I mentioned up in the cemetery, several children who were very involved in the early days of Julian as well, which means they probably grew up in this house. This house was built in 1876, which was about 7 years after the town was founded, so it's not right at the beginning, but it's still very early in the history of the town. So Drew Bailey and his family, most of the family, are buried right up the hill there in the cemetery. In fact, you can see the wall of their family plot when you're standing down here at the house. So they didn't go very far. And then the brewery company that is housing this today has this sort of barn building next door as well as part of their establishment there. And then next down to the east there are these little buildings. This was the Silver's store. A Street here is actually a street that you go up to get to the cemetery, up on the hill, hooks around. These old store buildings down here are also part of that same business complex today. Next building along is Julian Pie Company, one of the two big pie sellers in town, in what's probably a little house sitting just back off of the main street here. So before we take a look at the main part of downtown, let's just come right down here on the way into town, right off of Highway 78 here, and look at the Julian Museum. This is the Julian Pioneer Museum. This was opened I think they built it about 1949 or so, right at the end of the 40s, and opened in the early 50s. It's a reconstruction of a building that was here on the site, using some of the same stone walls and things, that was a blacksmith shop and then eventually a brewery. And then the museum folks rebuilt it in, like I said, about 1950 or so, and turned it into the museum. So there's a nice little plaque on the wall here that tells about it. It's usually open on the weekends. It only costs a few dollars to get in if it's open. Definitely worth walking around, taking a look at quite a few photos and things in there. This door has a bunch of old cattle brands stamped into it. And then sitting right behind the Pioneers Museum is this little reconstruction of the Grosskopf house. Chris Grosskopf was one of the blacksmiths who owned the building the museum's a reconstruction of. And then his wife, Annie, was very well known in the early 1900s in Julian as being sort of the early promoter of the apple industry and apple-based tourism in Julian. So she was actually called Apple Annie back then, and very well-known person. She's up in the cemetery as well. And then the inside of this little house is all outfitted with sort of typical furnishings at the time. Probably a little clean for being a blacksmith's house, actually, but a nice little recreation with the nice furniture, antique furniture, and house fixtures and everything inside. You can look through the windows and look into it. So it sits right behind the Pioneers Museum. And on the hill right behind the Pioneers Museum is the old Witch Creek School house, which was moved from down to the west in Witch Creek on Highway 78 in the early 1970s, and it was restored. We used it as a town library for a while, and then when the library built a new building further east, the Historical Society took this over. So the Julian Historical Society now has their collections and everything housed in the old Witch Creek Schoolhouse. And when I was filming this, they're working on the bell tower there, so they've got some scaffolding around it. But nice old building. It's nice to see it saved, because a lot of the old schoolhouses in San Diego County were not, or they were lost in fires and things. So It's nice to see this one up here. The Historical Society is open to different weekends and things, and for special events. So it's kind of a nice little quiet spot tucked up away on the hill here, right off of the highway. And then behind the Witch Creek Schoolhouse is a little building where they keep their couple of old buses that they have. One from the World War I period on the right, and another one from the late 1920s on the left. They use these in parades and for special events. These were both restored by the Motor Transport Museum down in Campo, the big museum there in the old Feldspar Mill down by Campo. They restored these for the Julian Historical Society a few years ago. So they're both beautiful restorations of the vehicles. Before we head up to Main Street, let's talk about this little building too that's down here by the museums. This used to be the fire station. It's a deli lately. It's actually an adobe building with a big wooden top structure on it. You can see what used to be the two front doors on the fire station there. Sometime in the early 1900s this was built, and it had housing for the firefighters up top. I may do another little video about an interesting thing that happened here as well. So heading on to Main Street, let's walk along the north side. The first building we look at is the old Jacoby store. This is actually a complete rebuild of it because the original was lost in a fire in the actually within the last 10 or 15 years, and they had to rebuild it. They rebuilt it pretty much exactly the same, but this is a completely new building because the other one was lost. It's right on that main corner there in Julian. There's a few little houses off on the left side over there on the west side of Main Street, used for a couple of businesses today, but we're going to take a look at the main part of Main Street here. So the next thing we're going to look at is this building. It's lately the Miners Diner. So the old drugstore building is actually called the Levi Marks building, except Marks bought out Levi very early on, I believe. Building was built in 1886. It's a brick building, and it's been a diner, drugstore, soda fountain kind of building for most of its years. It's also called a Tozer drugstore for many years in the 1900s, but kind of a landmark in Julian right on that main corner there. And then right down in front of the old Marks building is that very familiar front entrance to many people who have visited Julian. Ground floor of the building is actually quite a bit up above sidewalk level. And then there's a nice plaque here on this one also telling the history of it. Right behind the Marks store building is this little house. This was actually where Joseph Marks lived, and it's literally about 100 feet away from his business. There's just a little alleyway in between. So this is on that little side street, literally right behind the Levi Marks building. Next to the Marks building is the old Julian Garage Service Stations. Was a Texaco station for many years. Has a bunch of craft shops and things in it now. And then the next building we're going to see is the Daly building. This was Thomas Daly's building, and this housed a butcher shop for many years, sort of a meat market, and then supposedly there was also a saloon in the back of this building at an early time. So this is actually one of my favorite buildings in Julian because it's so original looking. The front entrance to this building is just incredibly dated. It's very rustic, and it just looks the part. It's not been, fancied up and sort of gussied up for the tourist industry. Lately, it's the liquor store, but it's just a very classic storefront. Not something you see a lot of in Southern California. So it's the Daly building. So looking from the other side of the street back to the north side there, the next building's east is the Daly building. That gray building on the left is a more modern building that was built to fill in an empty lot there. Julian Cafe has been rebuilt several times. Next building, that big white one, is the Wilcox building. We talked about the Wilcox father and the two sons when we were looking at the people up in the cemetery. This was their store building over here. It was also different stores over the years. It was the F.L. Blanc store in the early 1900s as well. And for many years now, since probably late 1960s, it's been home to Sprague Realty, which is still in the family, descendants of the Sprague family. So, long time Julian storefront in here. There's also a nice little history of the building on the plaque here as well. This photograph is on display in the Julian Town Hall from the Historical Society. This is the Wilcox building back when it was the F.L. Blanc store in the early 1900s. He had it for about 20 years or so. He had several different little rental houses and things too, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. So next building to the east of Wilcox building and its little sort of annex on the side of it, is the Julian Hotel, which is the outgrowth of the Robinson Hotel from the late 1800s. So the Julian Hotel has been added to several times over the years by subsequent owners, but the original operation goes back to Albert and Margaret Robinson in the 1890s or so. And of course, this is a famous Julian landmark and a venue for special events and such. So another little Historical Society plaque out front that tells about the history of it. So just past the Julian Hotel, there's two little houses that sit up above the main street there. The westernmost one of them was the house of the DeLuca family. We're going to talk about them when we get to the south side of Main Street because they had a store down there. And then the other building next to it, the one on the right there, was a rental that Thomas Daly had. He was the one who had that meat market, that nice building with a very historic-looking entrance down there on Main Street. So the big green buildings, which are actually fairly new, I think from 1980s, sitting right above Main Street there, were designed by architect Frank Zerbe to look like the Stonewall Mine over in Cuyamaca. They're called the Stonewall Shops. It's kind of a little mall of small stores in there, but they were designed to look like the Stonewall Mine. So not historic, but designed to look historic. So while we're on the north side of Main Street here, a block or two behind the Main Street are some interesting little houses and things too. This was Horace Wilcox's house. He's the one who owned the Wilcox store. He's one of the sons of the Wilcox family. This is his longtime home. There's also a plaque out here. The Julian Historical Society has done a really good job over the years of putting plaques in front of these historic buildings. And then this was F.L. Blanc's house, just about a block away from where his store was in the old Wilcox building up there. And Blanc was a preacher who had a bunch of businesses to help support his family, because I guess he had a whole bunch of kids. He had like 8 kids or so. So he not only had the preacher business, he also had the mercantile store down there and then several other enterprises. This was his little warehouse, which is now the Julian Women's Club on the little side street there. It's the old F.L. Blanc warehouse building. And then this little house right across the street from Blanc's house was a little house he had as a rental. Apparently he was a good carpenter, so he built a bunch of little rentals and things to help support his family with. And then just about a block away is the old Julian Elementary School, just kind of above downtown here. This is divided up into several residences now. It also has a little trailer court thing out front. But this is the old Julian Elementary School, a couple blocks off of the main street. All right, so let's get back down to Main Street here, Highway 78, and we'll head back to the west, back into downtown. So at the east end of Main Street is this neat old canopied service station. You don't see too many of these old service stations with the covering over them. This one still in business lately as a Ramco station. It's been a garage for many years. Just down behind the old service station is this building. This was actually the old Julian High School. It's at least one residence now, if not more than one. But this was in the early 1900s. This was the Julian High School building down there, and it definitely looks like it when you realize that's what it was. So, hiding down below the old service station there. So the McKinney building over here on the south side of Main Street is signed as being historic, but it's actually a very heavy remodel of a smaller building that was here before. It has a bank in it now. It even has an ATM built into the front wall, so not too historic anymore. Quite redone. Next to it, though, is the A.P. Frary house. Frary was one of the first developers of Stonewall Mine. He actually bought it from Skidmore, I believe, in the 1870s. And then Frary was also a partner in the Frary and Foster stage line, which came from down near Lakeside and ran up to Julian. A very successful stage line during the mining days, 1870s, 1880s. And Frary and his family lived in this small house, which supposedly is partly a little one-room schoolhouse, which I assume to be that part on the right over there. But this is a little, been several stores over the years. Lately it's a dress shop, like a fabric store in here. So nice little house, very nicely kept up. And this is that little end of it, which I assume was the little schoolhouse of probably 1870s or so, early 1870s fame. So that's the Frary house on the south side of Main Street. And then just up on C Street, about a block south of of Main Street is the old Julian Jail. This one dates from 1914, made out of concrete. It replaced an earlier wooden version that sat on the same spot. There's a little plaque on it here. And then the cells are sort of made up so you can see what they look like. The two adjoining accommodations in the old Julian Jail. So the Julian Cider Company on Main Street, this kind of odd-looking building back here, is actually a kind of a creative reuse of an old service station. This was a gas station for many years during the 1900s. It's been a cider company for quite a while. The Julian Mercantile Company, which is next door, is actually a 1900s building. It's made to look fairly old, but it's a little bit later building. Next building along the south side of Main Street is the DeLuca Store. This was very similar to that Thomas Daly building, the old meat store on the other side of Main Street. This has been a little grocery store here in recent years, but does date back to 1890 or so. It was just a little wooden sort of false front store. There's a plaque on the front of it telling the history of it, and a little story about it having a little saloon in the basement at one time. So continuing along westward on the south side of Main Street, the buildings that are now Mom's Pies and the Warm Hearth are later buildings, or 1900s buildings. They're not new by any means, but they were hardware store buildings and such that were built in the early 1900s. The next building there says Julian Realty on it. That was the old Chamber of Commerce building. And before that, it was the library. And inside that building, around the top of the wall in the office, is actually a mural that was painted by Marshall South, who lived out in the desert with his family on Ghost Mountain. Kind of the famous, notorious Marshall South from out in the desert, and he painted a little mural around there. The day that I was filming this, they weren't open, so I wasn't able to go inside and film. But if you peer in the window, you can see it, kind of a little western scene around the top of the wall in what's now the Realty office in Julian. And we'll finish off our historic walking tour of Julian with the Town Hall, back on the main intersection here again. This Town Hall was built in 1914 as a replacement to several others that predated it. There's a plaque on the front here. Also, downstairs is where they hold quite a few craft sales and different art shows and things. And the upstairs is usually open as well. The Chamber of Commerce is right inside the door now in a little office here. And there's also some really nice historic photos, a couple of them that I've used in this video, that are on the inside. You can also pick up a little pamphlet that's a historic walking tour of Julian, where you're going to find a lot of what was in this video, because it's a nice little walking tour handout that they have that points out what these different buildings are and the histories of them. So I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.